Well, unfortunately, and this is why I always say to people, there's this tendency when we've lost our own sense of morality and judgment that we ask the state to step in and be our surrogate morality for us. And people will say, there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law. No, no, think twice every time you say that because the tendency is once something is in law, it doesn't leave, it expands. It expands. So what you're going to see is you're going to see legal making illegal more and more aspects of parenthood that those in power don't like.
Ashley Froley, what a wonderful joy it is to talk to you. You are a visiting researcher at University of Kent, and we're talking about the recent report that's been published by the Welsh Government on 3 years after they have introduced a new law banning smacking, essentially, or banning the reasonable chastisement arguments against smacking your children. I think we both feel the same about parental rights and parental autonomy. And the report has recently come out, which has looked at the results in the first 3 years. Tell me, first of all, how does looking at this fit into the work you do, what you do at University of Kent, etc.?
Well, my main area of research is social problems, so how we talk about them, causal stories that we tell for what causes social problems. And in terms of, so I'm a visiting researcher at the Center for Parenting Culture Studies, and a huge part of my work there is looking at the way that parents are scapegoated for social problems. That parenting styles and so on are increasingly located at the heart of the causes and solutions to a wide range of social issues. And this has been going on for several decades. And I am continuously shocked at the degree to which parents are scapegoats. And this is just completely uncontested. It is across the political spectrum. You see the left blame parents. The left takes this very anti-family kind of
Yeah,
approach to
yeah,
social issues, in spite of the fact that it's an attack. You could see it as a neoliberal attack on the family, on women, blaming women and their wombs and so on for the problems of the world. But they have no problem sort of jumping on that bandwagon. And on the right, because, and in many ways, it kind of sits better on the right in terms of a kind of, well, it depends on what kind of right wing we're talking about, but um, in terms of individual responsibility for social issues and so on. So, because it has this kind of bipartisan support, very, very few people question this scapegoating of parents. And the result has been one that, unsurprisingly, fewer and fewer people want to be parents. I mean, why would you want to be responsible for all the problems in the world? Um, it might shock you to learn that parents spend much, much more time with their children than they have, at least since surveys began. And the one exception to that is France. But in most countries in which there's survey data, at least in the Western world, parents spend much, much more time with their children than they have, at least for over 70 years. It just goes up and up and up and up. And parenting, the expectations heaped upon parents have become much more intensive. They're just mounting and mounting and mounting. And we have this kind of cultural narrative that encourages people when you're an adult to say, "Oh, why do I have this personal problem? Why do I have this interpersonal issue? Must be something that my parents did," you know. And if you look at a higher level, if you look at policy documents, say for instance at the EU level, they will talk about poverty as something that is reproduced within families. So they will blame families for poverty. Never mind like the deep structural inequalities in society. No, no, it's parents and your bad ideas. This is what causes poverty. And so parenting intervention becomes core to solving poverty, to solving whatever psychological issues you believe people have. Parents, it's always, where are the parents? What did the parents do? And you just think, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be complicit in the problems of the world. I can't but mess up. No matter how hard you try to be like a progressive parent, the next generation will be like, well, my parents messed me up because of their progressive ideas. So there's really, or if you try to be traditional, my parents messed me up because of their traditional ideas. And I think there's a bigger story around like kind of the responsibility that we're able to take, the loss of meaning in our lives, and the excessive introspection that is cultivated because of that, and so on and so forth. But in general, this is what I'm interested in, the way that parenting has become so, so central to social problems and how that makes the act of parenting basically impossible. You cannot be a good parent. It is not possible. I remember when I was but what I mean is like you can't measure up because there are just so many different expectations. When I was first pregnant, having my children, my brother-in-law said to me, "Here's the advice I'm going to give you. No matter what you do, it's wrong."
Yep.
And that's exactly right because somebody is going to tell you what you did is wrong,
Yeah.
and you are going to
Yeah.
mess up your kids.
Yeah.
And why would you want to do that?
Obviously, we do get a lot from our parents, but you're absolutely right. There's an awful lot else going on in society these days, and the state's idea that, well, maybe the state can do it better. And Scotland's Nicola Sturgeon, when she referred to herself as wanting to be Scotland's chief mammy, above and beyond the thoughts and the ideas of any parent that she felt she could be better. I'm interested in the point you make that parents, and we'll get onto the smacking thing in a minute, but that parents spend more time with their children because the perception is wraparound school care, everyone's got to get out to work in order to earn money to pay for extraordinarily high living costs and housing prices. And so get your kids off to breakfast clubs and the state will look after them, and after school clubs, and essentially you just put them to bed. That seems to be the kind of zeitgeist, but you're saying maybe not so.
Yeah, it's a widely held misperception that we don't spend enough time with our children. If you think back, probably to your own childhood was very similar. My childhood in the 1980s was this way. I wasn't allowed inside my house, during the day. I was, in the morning, I got up, I got dressed, and I left my house. And I went and I played with other children out in the forest in Canada, behind my house. We had a big, big forest with a pond with beavers, and we harassed the beavers. And this is what we did. I did not spend a lot of time with my parents. The time that we spent together was mainly on like long car rides, things like that, and over dinner. And that was really the extent of it. My parents didn't play with me. And in fact, this is the norm for most cultures. Most cultures, parents avoid playing with their children like the plague. They do not want their children to see them as playmates. And they have wonderful childhoods in most cultures around the world where their parents have very little to do with them. They have, they have other children that play a larger role in their lives, or they have cousins and this sort of thing. So there's this idea that you're supposed to be like on the floor playing with your kids, and that you have to be like on top of these kids all the time. And if you're not doing that, you're a bad parent. So you wind up with this sense of like a time crunch, right? So it's like, oh, there's not enough time. I don't have enough time. But the problem is that there's not enough time physically to do all the things that you are required to do as a parent and also as a worker. So you are supposed to be, this is Sharon Hayes talks about this in a very important book from the 90s. She says you're supposed to be an intensive worker and an intensive parent. And now that's sort of been memeified to I'm supposed to work as though I have no children and parent as though I don't have to work. You can't do right for doing wrong. So you're supposed to be intensive parent, but also an intensive worker. But if you're also an intensive parent, you're a tiger mom and you're a helicopter parent and you're also to blame. But if you don't do that, you are also to blame for the lack of success of your children. Yep. So people are spending much more time with their kids, first of all, because we've sort of made it illegal in many cases for the children to play outside by themselves, or at least simply frowned upon. And you are supposed to be with those kids all the time. That has not been the case. That's not the case around the world. If you look at the anthropological record, most parents do not play with their children, and they really make sure that the children don't see them as a playmate. That's the last thing that you want when you've got a house to take care of, you got firewood to gather, all of these sort of things. But now we do. Now there is that expectation that you're a bad parent if you sit there on your phone while your kids are at the playground. You're supposed to be on the equipment with the kids, which is absolutely mad. And then the end result of that is that we destroy this kind of informal world of children's play that it grows when parents aren't around. But that's another question, another issue.
It is, and we might touch on that, who knows. But so in the context of all that, we have Wales saying, well, we must ban smacking. We must take away the argument of reasonable chastisement. We know that abuse is already illegal, but actually we want to ban any kind of, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Physical contact with the kid from a punitive perspective, and that was like March 2022. I don't know if you've looked into the arguments and the reasoning that were used in order to put that in place in the first place.
Yes, I have extensively. It is so ridiculous. It's actually infuriating, but we're so squeamish about this because culturally, childhood, you have there's an expectation or injunction, sorry, an injunction for childhood to be compulsorily happy. So that is our cultural understanding. Childhood is a compulsorily happy time. And so any kind of discomfort that a child might feel is looked on with suspicion and fear, and it's associated with narratives of damage and trauma. But it's completely historically inaccurate because throughout human history, children lived through much, much, much worse circumstances than they do today. And today's children are not uniquely well adjusted and psychologically happy. I think actually there is such a thing as a too happy childhood. If you look, for instance, in Scandinavian countries where it is so quote unquote child centered, where there's a book published a few years ago, like something like When the Children Took Over, where it is under pain of capital capital of state punishment, under pain of state punishment, you have to you have to censor your children. There's enormous rates of psychological issues when children hit their teens because you've done away with this idea that becoming an adult, which most cultures have, most cultures have these rites of passage where becoming an adult is the achievement of a higher status. Now you say that becoming an adult is a higher status than being a child. Oh, you're a horrible person. You're committing this terrible inequality. You're creating this sort of inequality and so on. But you need that as an individual to be going towards something. To become an adult is to be a greater status. To be married was a greater status. This is why we have these sort of rituals that surround these things. We have these rituals where you move through these rites of passage and you come out the other side a higher status. Now we've reversed that. Becoming an adult is actually a demotion in status, right? You hear all the time, children are the future, children are the solution, which says that adults are not the future. Adults don't know the solutions. Adults are responsible for the problems, and they heap these problems onto the children. That's the implicit message of that. So then, becoming an adult is becoming complicit, is becoming a part of the problem. So why would you want to become an adult? There's very little sort of you don't experience as a higher status. You have this sense of like normlessness as you move through the world. And a lot of people talk about that. They talk about, you turn adult into a verb that you use with ironic distance, adulting. Oh, I'm adulting today because it doesn't feel real to you because we've done away with a lot of the meaning behind these rituals of these rites of passage, or we've done away with them altogether. Going back to the sort of arguments used against the ban, used to push the ban, it was things like, you wouldn't do this to a stranger in the street. It would be assault. But when you do it to a poor little child, then suddenly it is fine. Well, you don't have a relationship with a stranger in the street. And if you gave them a smack on the bum, it would be really weird. It would be like what? But they do that to put an image in your head of like adults punching each other, like beating each other up, so that it makes it sound like that is not already illegal when it comes to children. That you have a relationship with this child, and that act has a specific meaning. It is there for the purposes of discipline, and it's usually phased out as the child comes to be able to understand and reason and so on. And it's used at the point where children just think it's funny when you tell them off or when you try to explain like you are in danger, you cannot do this thing, you are in danger. So you have a quick consequence that clears the air and it's done. And that I think about this all like the loot how people repeated this argument ad nauseum. Like, I'm sorry to overshare, but I hope you'll permit it for the purposes of the argument. But every time my husband passes me in the kitchen, he slaps me on the bum. Am I a victim of domestic abuse? Right? Like, I am not, because context, surprise, surprise, matters. I have a relationship with this person. Sometimes he smacks me a little too hard and it hurts. And I go, oh, that hurt. Oh, no, I'm actually a victim. I'm a victim of domestic violence, because you wouldn't do that to a stranger on the street now, would you?
Yeah, you wouldn't. Right. No, well, you probably shouldn't. And also the idea that, children are not small adults.
Yes.
They're small human beings, but they're not small adults. There's the whole developmental phase thing and everything else like that. And the idea of you wouldn't force somebody else into a car seat, but sometimes
Exactly.
you have to get a child into a car seat, and that requires physical restraint, in a way that you wouldn't do to somebody you didn't know, a consenting adult. You wouldn't force them into a car seat. So there are
Basically, the
fundamental
entire
differences.
parent-child relationship is one that you don't
Yeah,
have with anyone else and
yeah,
requires you to do so many things that you
yeah.
would not, could not, and should not do to anyone else. But you are responsible for the socialization of that child. And correctly socializing that child requires that you pull down their pants to check that they haven't pooped themselves, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Another thing you wouldn't do in the street
No.
to a stranger. Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
just, it boggles the mind that this was, and it really speaks to the fact that people see the relationship between the parent and the child as one that is just fraught with risk, that is not special in any way, is really begrudgingly allowed. Like, how do we allow this stranger who's not been vetted, who's not a professional, who's not got an education, who isn't up to date on the latest science, which, by the way, is mostly junk science done on American white families. Different, as Gabriel Scheidegger says, different is not deficient. There are many, many different ways of raising children all around the world. They're not deficient. They are tuned to a context. Human beings are empirical. We do what works within our milieus. We raise children according to how they are supposed to be in our culture. It's absolutely shocking that this was an argument that actually passed, and it's because they don't like the idea that the unvetted individual is able to raise a child, and it's really begrudging. It's really like, oh, we have to let these people do this, but if we're gonna allow it, it's going to be under heavy surveillance, particularly for you poor black folk. I sound like I've slipped that in there, but it's even in the Welsh government's own review of their smacking ban, where they admit that Black and ethnic minorities are more likely to use smacking, but they don't say that it is not associated with negative outcomes in those families because it is part of the cultural milieu.
So let's move on to the kind of the evidence and the data, because as far as I can tell, that is always the lacking thing in these discussions, that they just don't have anything. So I can understand trying to steel man their argument, if you like. I can understand that, well, we want to improve child safety. We want to improve child outcomes. But then right at the start, there was very little evidence that reasonable, loving chastisement from a caring parent caused anything other than good. It just wasn't there.
Well, they would dispute that, and because so they've produced like advocacy research, in my opinion. So research that's done by people who are it's not possible in this domain to be like a white lab coat kind of person, be like, oh, gee, I wonder what this this is done by activists on both sides. It's activist research on both sides. People who don't think it should be outlawed and people who really, really think it should be outlawed. And it's not surprising that the latter gets a lot more funding because it just sounds nice. Oh, protect the children and so on. So they've produced these studies that are fraught with issues, and the Christian Institute has put out a very good report recently that's looked in great detail at the problems with this research. And Robert Larslier has been arguing for decades with these fanatics, and people say he's a fanatic himself, but thank God for him because he's one of the few people willing to stick their neck out because it sounds so good on the face of it. Like, oh, we want to protect the children, as I said. But yeah, it's based on studies that tend to be Eurocentric. And by that I mean like ethnocentric for sort of white middle class people. And a big one is they tend to elide light smacking for the purposes of discipline, and beating. They don't
Yeah,
really make that
two very
distinction.
different things. Yeah,
But the law does. And well,
yeah,
the law did. And now it doesn't. It's all the same. It's all the same. A
yeah.
light smack is the same as beating a child.
Yeah, yeah. So let's look at their own report after 3 years. And as far as I can, I mean, the three failings that I've picked up. But you tell me what you made of the report that came out.
So as I was saying, they explicitly note that Black and ethnic minority communities are more likely to use physical discipline, and then they're like, and it's wrong and it's bad. What those Black and ethnic minority people are doing, they ought to know better. So there's like this sort of, I mean, the whole thing is riven with this white middle class bias to begin with. But they don't mention, as I said, that it's also associated with better outcomes in those families. but still it's wrong and it's bad. Why? Because we feel squeamish about it. We really don't like that. The other thing that they, of course, they're going to say, oh, this was such a great success. Awareness of the law has gone up. Awareness that it is wrong to physically chastise children. And I should put a disclaimer here. Like, I'm often called a smacking advocate. I'm not a smacking advocate. I think it's none of the government's business how people discipline their children. And and it's not just smacking that the government is involved. They're trying to push that part of this push is pushing positive parenting, which is not associated with better outcomes. Authoritative parenting is, and they've tried to make positive parenting into authoritative parenting, but it is not. And authoritative parenting has historically used smacking as a backup method, and that's their little dirty secret. But I'm not a smacking advocate. I think most people, the vast majority of people, use their own judgment and their developing relationship with their own child to decide how they're going to discipline this child. For the very small number of parents that do not do that, the law is there to catch them. And the inevitable result when you um, uh, take away the defense of reasonable chastisement is that good parents will be prosecuted. And not only that, but ethnic minority parents and immigrants and so on, they are the ones who are going to get prosecuted. And it's not in this report, of course it's not, what the socioeconomic background of the people, the hundreds of people that have been referred, that have been investigated, that have been put through these sort of parenting classes. And by the way, if you get diverted like that, you have to admit that you've done something wrong in order to do that, and it stays on your record. An enhanced DBS check will show that. Will show that you've been accused of assaulting a child. So it's not like there's no consequence here, but I would love to know the socioeconomic background of the people that whose lives they've destroyed by doing that. You cannot get a nursing degree, you cannot work with children, you cannot work with vulnerable people if this comes up on your DBS check. But no mention of that, no mention of that. And I'm absolutely certain, I will guarantee you that if we can find that data, it is going to be poor people. I guarantee it because they're under the most surveillance already. They're given the benefit of the doubt far less frequently. In fact, I
So can
did.
we not can
Sorry,
we
go
not
ahead.
do an FOI for that data? I mean, it's obviously held somewhere.
Well, the Christian Institute put out their own review of the legislation, and they tried to find the data themselves. How many they managed to get numbers in terms of how many people were referred, how many cases wound up being referred where, or so were investigated where smacking was the sole reason, and they found hundreds every year, and I think it was haven't got the data in front of me unfortunately, but I think it was like 112% increase in referrals where smacking was the only reason for the referral. But a lot of councils were not keeping the data. They were not keeping the data. And in terms of finding out the socioeconomic background, nobody is reporting it. I'd have to try and get that data myself. It's just not out there. And, there's good reason for the Welsh government not to want that data to be out there and not to want. And unfortunately, the stories of the people who've been through this now, it's not a small thing to be accused of assaulting a child, right? And there's no differentiation. And also, one can imagine that someone who's like seriously harmed a child could try to get away with it by saying, "Oh, but that was just a light smack," because there's no differentiation when that comes up on somebody's record. It could be
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
Um,
that's a
but
good point.
yeah, so that's not there, and I would be shocked to learn that it wasn't mainly poor people. And as I was starting to say a moment ago, I did a debate. When this was being debated in the public sphere. They tried to do it as quickly as possible and say, no, it's no big deal. It's just about protecting the most vulnerable in society, and you wouldn't. Anyway, when I did this debate on BBC Radio, and I stayed on the line, and after me, a police officer came on, and he actually said openly, he said, "My concern, it hasn't been clarified yet, but am I going to have to criminalize even a professional?" He said that. Even a professional, would I actually have to criminalize them too? So he was actually saying, normally I would discriminate. Are you working class? Come with me. Are you a professional? It's okay. You can stay
Oh,
home.
that's really interesting.
And his concern was
Goodness
that he
me.
might have to. But don't worry. You're allowed to use your judgment. And guess whose judgment it is going to fall down
Yeah,
harder on?
yeah,
Working class
yeah,
and black and ethnic
yeah,
minority
yeah.
people, as it does with any law.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So the report doesn't really. The whole point of the legislation was to improve outcomes for children and to protect children. But the report doesn't show that any of that has actually taken place. All it does is talk about awareness, and they're very, very different things. So it hasn't been able to show that the law has done what the law was there to do, because the outcomes just, or if it has found that, it hasn't published that.
I mean, it can't do that in such a short period of time, to be fair. But yeah, I mean, that's all that they cared about. That's all that they cared about was like that you parents, you know what you're doing is wrong. That we are, and I talked about this when this was initially being debated, that how I was understanding it was that this was really um, about, it was a debate about whose values would be recognized as the values of the culture. That is really what it was about. It's a bit like prohibition of alcohol. There's a very famous book, well, not famous enough, but one of my favorite sociological books is by Joseph Gusfield called Symbolic Crusade. And he tries to understand prohibition as essentially a symbolic crusade because it didn't work. People still drank. But the point wasn't to stop people from drinking, but for those who did drink to know every time they drank, they were transgressing what were the accepted rules of the culture. That I am the one who is able to dictate what the accepted rules of the culture are. That the people who were teetotalers, their power was declining, particularly the material power was declining. And therefore, they were grasping desperately for cultural power. And you can see this with the downwardly mobile professional middle class. I am good. I studied. I am a good person. And I live by all the right rules and you don't. You're bad people and since I'm not going to get my rewards in society, I want you to be punished. And you can feel that kind of hatred, that fear amongst professionals of the working class that they might become them. And so this is just one example of these kinds of like status rituals of people, the way that they would ostentatiously show that they were good people. I care about children. You do not. So you should be punished. So I think this is what it was about. It was about saying these are the values of the culture. Because what people would often say is like, how do you police this? How would you police this? One, it's a pretty bad sign for a law that if you did police it, it would be the most horrible thing ever. Like if you were to go, you would be rounding up an enormous number of people and destroying families everywhere. And if you were gonna like, let's backdate it then, most politicians are going to going to jail, right? But it was to send a message. That was the point. It was to send a message. It was to say whose values are the values of the culture. That this sort of professionalized parenting and this positive parenting is the official values held by the government, which then says those are the values of the culture. So when you do it, which you will, you know that you are breaking my rules, that you are outside the bounds of the culture. I think that is essentially what it was about. It is a symbolic crusade.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And of course, there's often the subject is raised in the UK Parliament with a view to proceeding just as Wales has done. Would you say that from the report that's come out of the Welsh Government that has given strength or not to those in UK Parliament who would want to expand the ban?
Well, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. That's why they went to Scotland first and Wales. They do this. It's a very common strategy for a lot of different laws that campaigners want to get passed. They go specifically to places where the pathway to policymaking is a lot quicker and a lot easier. So they know that the Welsh government doesn't have control over a lot of things. And so they're very, very keen, and Scottish Parliament as well, they're very, very keen to take a stand on things. They want to be like, do something really visible. And so they will go to them first. And that's why you always see really controversial laws passed first in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Less so Northern Ireland, but Wales and Scotland first. And then they use that success as a battering ram for England. And then they'll use England as a battering ram for Canada and the USA. So this is not just like a few people. This is an organized, these are NGOs that are organized. They operate worldwide. Scotland's not special. Wales is not special. It is, these are strategic push points. And it's a worldwide campaign to stop corporal punishment against children. And actually, the global story of it is very interesting. I wrote about this for Standpoint magazine, which unfortunately no longer exists, so you can't really read about it. But if you go, these NGOs, they have a list of countries, and you'll see this sometimes reported by journalists. 50 countries around the world have banned smacking, as though the people in these countries rose up and were like, you know what? Ban us from smacking our children. That's not at all what happened. Look at the entries on this list. One of them is Togo. And so I looked into this. Why is Togo, a country that's dealing with childhood AIDS, why are they banning parents from using corporal punishment in the home? That's weird. How did that even get onto the political agenda? Well, it turns out that, and this has happened in a few cases, when a country gets bailout loans or IMF packages or World Bank packages, they come with strings attached. So they'll come with a suite of policy guidance. And NGOs will attach themselves to this in order to get laws passed in various countries that they wish to see elsewhere. And one of these is UNICEF writing a children's code. So UNICEF wrote the children's code in Togo, if I'm not mistaken. I've got sourced this in my Standpoint piece, but I'm remembering it from about 8 years ago now, 7 years ago. But this happens in various countries, not just in relation to smacking. But they write their children's code and they outlaw corporal punishment in the home and even shouting at children. Because they've got free reign, right? They can do what they want. And like they've tried this in other countries too, like Cinderella laws, where you like psychological abuse, which is so open to interpretation, particularly as like we become much more fragile as a society. And they've tried to outlaw like psychological abuse in the home, which is very a scary thing. I mean, obviously you don't want to be defending psychological abuse, but that is so open to interpretation. It's actually terrifying.
Yeah, you're correct. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, so that you can see that when they get free reign to write in what they want, they write stuff in like that. And then they create this list and then they use that because it's not going to be enforced in Togo. Nobody cares. Like they're not out there like, rounding up parents or something like that. It's just on the books to put another country on the list. Then they use that. They go to other countries, 50 countries around the world, 60 countries around the world. You're backward. You're behind the times. So then they get Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. They go, the rest of the UK has done it. You're behind the times. We want the law to fall in line with these countries. And then when they get England, they'll go to Canada, they'll go to the United States. And the United States is way more difficult because you've got like a religious right and so on. But, and it's more difficult because it's like, the structure of policy making. But that's also why a lot of these NGOs are American. That's why they're going around the world because it's much harder to get something passed for the whole country in America. You can do some things within particular states, but it's much more difficult.
What are the motives? I mean, I don't know if you can answer this because are you saying that the motives are generally just misplaced child well-being motives? So these people really think that this is a helpful thing to do to help children to be better advantaged and to turn out better? Or is there some other motive behind and in fact they're just using this as a vehicle?
So I do think that they think that they're good people. I think that they're doing this with good intentions. But I think that it is part of an overactive concern for children, which masks an underlying misanthropy. And what I mean by that is that part of the concern for children is a dislike of adults, a deep belief that most adults cannot be trusted, that they are irrational, and that they are dangerous to themselves and others, and that it takes quite a lot to create a good citizen that is not a danger to themselves and others, and that you have to be constantly kind of enacting these new ideals of citizenship, which are to understand yourself as a risk and to be constantly looking to authorities for the right way to do things, the right way to parent, the right way to, address the person sitting in front of you. Are they, she, they, whatever. You shouldn't use your own judgment because that's going to be wrong and bad and discriminatory. You should recognize that you're going to hurt this person. That's the first thing that you're likely to do. And you should instead look to the official line on reality. You have a pin. pin that was given by the institution for this particular meeting that has sanctioned this thing. And you have to put your pronouns in your bio, right? The institution says you have to do this, and that's the official line on reality. I cannot trust my own judgment. If you look at, I wrote a report for MCC Brussels some time ago about family policy called Family in Fragments. And the way that they talk about families is really scary. First of all, they scarcely use the word family. They like, or mother, like they like vomit while they're saying it. You have to like search through like miles and miles of fine print before you see the word mother. And then it's usually used when motherhood is taking the woman away from work, where she really should be. She's not very good at it anyway. So what's she doing there?
The state is much better.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's this kind of this sense that being a parent actually requires all of this, not just being a parent, but being a citizen requires this like constant second guessing of yourself. I call it in my most recent book, heteronomy. That the old ideal, the old Enlightenment ideal of the citizen was to be autonomous, right? That you had this idea that human beings are basically rational and reasonable. Doesn't mean people get everything right all the time, but that there is a process of thinking and reflection that goes on within a human being. And that's the basis for like everything in our liberal democratic societies. It's, you know, and it's the basis of science. It says like, I can show you the way that I did things, and you, fellow human, can see that and do the same things, and you should be able to come to the same result. And if you don't, we'll argue about it. That's the basis of science, because I'm a human, no matter what color I am. I am going to be able to connect with you on the basis of reason. And it's the basis of our ability to sign contracts, to get married, to, you know, to do all of these things, to consent to be governed. But what's happening is that is eroding, and it's being replaced with a new kind of ideal subjectivity, an ideal kind of citizenship, which is heteronymous, which is constantly self-doubting, recognizes that most human beings are actually quite irrational, that we act on the basis of impulses, that we are very vulnerable. We are not resilient. We are vulnerable as a default. If you want to be resilient, it actually takes like my specialized course for just $39.99.99. You know, resilience requires you to buy this bookshelf full of books and take a course and so on. You know, you're not resilient. You are vulnerable. That's the idea. And so you, as a good citizen, must recognize that you are irrational, you are vulnerable, you're quite likely to be led astray, and you should always be looking to authorities. And I think the overarching appearance of the concern for children masks that suspicion of adults. That we're so concerned, so excessively concerned about children and damage in childhood because we think that the adult world is beyond repair, is just so completely messed up that most adults are a mess, that the best you can do is teach the next generation to be heteronymous, to have a close relationship with institutions as opposed to adults and unvetted normal people just hanging out in the world, which are more likely to be a danger to you. You should actually go to institutions. You should have a better relationship with Childline than you do with adults in your life.
Interesting. Yeah. And it feels sometimes that, good families don't need big governments. Yeah, because good families pass on culture from one generation to the next. They're self-sufficient. They look after themselves. Of course, therefore, if you want to be a strong, powerful, influential government, you need to undermine that concept of family because you need to intervene and stop parents parenting.
Exactly. And in fact, this idea that you pass on your culture, or you pass on culture from one generation to the next, that's a problem for them. So as I said, have a look at my Families in Fragments report. The way that they talk about tradition is, and I've done a bunch of reports on the trans issue as well, where I say basically the same thing. The way that they talk about tradition, it's like that is the sole thing that's really a problem, because their main understanding of why things go wrong, why there are social problems, is because you make bad decisions. If you could just be taught to behave correctly, we wouldn't have these problems. We wouldn't have economic crises. People are just making the wrong decisions. They're making bad choices. And one of the key distortions is culture and tradition. It produces people who choose wrong, women, for instance, who choose to stay home and work. And that creates inequalities and inefficiencies in the labor market. You stupid women. You are brainwashed by the patriarchy, and that's why they put all this stuff that sounds so feminist, like, oh, how many female CEOs, leaving behind the fact that most women are not going to be CEOs. You're going to choose to be a mother as opposed to like a checkout lady at Lidl. That's going to give you way more meaning in your life.
Yeah, yeah. You moan about the patriarchy, but actually you're going to spend your life slaving for some other man boss in somewhere other than your home, and for a pittance and for awful circumstances, instead of actually raising the next generation or something else like that.
And it sounds so like right wing, right? But Karl Marx talks about this in Capital Volume 1. He says that the capitalist loves women, loves female workers because they're manipulable. They've been socialized to be nice. He doesn't say that, but he says because they're desperate. They're desperate. They've got kids to feed. They're going to work round the clock. And they do. They do. They are the preferred worker now, I think. They are the ideal subject of capitalism because we're socialized to be nice, we're socialized to be accommodating, to be grateful. Wow, thank you so much for giving me a job. I will work 18 hours a day. A man won't do that. A man's going to demand more. The movements of the 19th century that were so destabilizing of our system were movements of working men. We can't have that. We can't have that. So yeah, I think this is part of it. Is this desire for like a malleable, good subject who's going to be easy to govern, and who has a core relationship with the state and who second guesses themselves obsessively.
My goodness. Well, this has gone in directions I didn't think, but also directions I could really do with following up in like 100 conversations. But in terms of the future, so in terms of the smacking laws in Wales, I suppose, is there, if we had another administration might remove the law, or would you say that's impossible now? Would you say that it's inevitable that the UK Parliament is going to follow? What's your view of the future?
Well, unfortunately, and this is why I always say to people, there's this tendency when we've lost our own sense of morality and judgment that we ask the state to step in and be our surrogate morality for us. And people will say, there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law. No, no, think twice every time you say that because the tendency is once something is in law, it doesn't leave, it expands. It expands. So what you're going to see is you're going to see legal making illegal more and more aspects of parenthood that those in power don't like. And I mentioned the example of shouting. It sounds crazy, but that's on the books, and that's like the idea of discipline generally is really looked upon with suspicion by those in power. They don't like the idea of disciplining children at all, and that's like the core of positive parenting as well. It's like like people take it so far. It's like they don't say no at all. So I wouldn't be surprised if this expands as opposed to goes off the books. I'm sorry to say that, but I think that's the case. I don't know what will happen in England. I hope that people will stay strong and England has been an island an island within an island of resistance to a lot of this junk. And people still stubbornly believe in themselves. They believe in their ability to judge, to raise their children as they judge to be the best way to raise them, which is a hard thing to do. It's already very difficult to use your judgment and decide what is the best way to make an adult that will work within this world. That's hard already. And people believe in themselves that they can do it. And I hope that they will continue to do so and fight back against this stuff.
Great stuff. Ashley Frowley, we will talk again, but for now, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.